Chapter 19, The Plan You've Been Writing All Along. Trust the wisdom you didn't know you were collecting. You've come so far. Not just through this book, though that's part of it. You've come so far through decades, maybe 30 years, maybe 40, maybe more, of living with food as both comfort and battleground. Through seasons of peace and seasons of war with yourself. Through times when eating felt effortless and times when every choice felt loaded with meaning you couldn't decode. You've been writing your dissertation all this time. Not consciously, not in neat chapters with references and conclusions, but in your body, in your patterns, in the moments when food felt like an old friend and the moments when it felt like an ambush. In the diets that worked until they didn't and the ones that never worked at all. In the times you felt at home in your body and the times you felt like you were wearing someone else's skin. You've been collecting data on a sample size of one, you. And that makes you the world's leading expert on exactly the person whose healing actually matters. This chapter isn't about giving you another plan to follow. God knows you've tried enough of those. This is about something else entirely. About recognizing the wisdom you've been accumulating all along. The patterns you've been unconsciously mapping, the truths you've been dismissing because they seemed too simple to matter. This is about trusting that you already know more than you think you do. The tangled drawer. Think of it like this. Somewhere in your house, maybe a kitchen drawer, maybe a jewelry box, maybe that basket where random things live, there's a tangle. Years of things thrown in together. Necklaces knotted around each other. Earrings caught in chains. Rubber bands and paper clips and things you forgot you own all wound together. That's your decades with food. Every diet you tried got tangled in there. Every moment of clarity and every moment of confusion. Every time you ate with peace and every time you ate with panic. Every rule you followed perfectly until you couldn't anymore. Every boundary that worked until life changed and it didn't. It looks like a mess, like evidence of decades of failure. But what if it's actually evidence of decades of trying, of learning, of your system gathering information about what works and what doesn't? What if untangling that drawer gently, patiently, without judgment, would reveal exactly what you need to know? Not what some expert says you need to know, what you need to know based on your lived experience with your body and your patterns and your life. When things flowed, close your eyes for a moment. Think back through your decades with food. Not to the struggles, we'll get there, but to the moments, the seasons, the periods when things felt easier, when food wasn't quite so loaded, when eating felt more natural, when you weren't thinking about it every waking moment. Maybe it was 6 months in your 20s. Maybe it was last summer. Maybe it was that year you lived near the ocean, or when you worked that job with the predictable schedule, or when you were in that relationship that felt safe, or when you had that friend who really saw you. What was different then? Not what you were eating necessarily, though that might be part of it, but what were the conditions? What was present in your life that made food less complicated? Were you sleeping better, moving your body in ways that felt good, connected to people who didn't judge you, living with less chaos, creating things, laughing more, feeling purposeful, supported, seen? Write these down somewhere, not for me, for you. These aren't casual observations. This is your map. These are the conditions under which your system can heal. The times that were hard. Now the other side. Not to wallow, but to gather information. When have things been hardest with food? Not just I gained weight or I binged, but when has your relationship with food felt most fraught, most complicated, most painful? Maybe after loss. Maybe during transitions. Maybe when isolated or overwhelmed or unsupported. Maybe when you were trying to be perfect or pretending to be fine or performing for everyone while falling apart inside. What conditions were present then? This matters because your struggles aren't random. They're not evidence that you're broken or weak or lacking willpower. They're your system's intelligent response to conditions that were genuinely difficult. Your patterns have been trying to tell you something all along. What happens when you're exhausted? When you're lonely? When you're going through the motions but not really living? When you're saying yes to everyone else and no to yourself? When your boundaries are so porous you don't know where you end and everyone else begins? These are your early warning signs. Your system has been trying to get your attention. Sacred boundaries, the difference that changes everything. You've probably tried a lot of rules over the years. Don't eat after 7 p.m., no sugar, no carbs, measure everything, count everything, track everything, be perfect or start over. One bite-off plan equals total failure. Rules feel safe because they're clear, black and white. You're either following them or you're not. But here's what you might have noticed. Rules create rebellion. Not because you're oppositional or broken, but because rigid rules don't honor the complexity of being human. They don't bend for grief or celebration or illness or stress or life. They treat you like a machine that needs programming instead of a person who needs understanding. And these rules are tailored for the masses. Sacred boundaries are different. They come from inside you instead of being imposed from outside. They're based on what you know works for your body, not what worked for someone else. They honor context and nuance. They expect imperfection. They build trust instead of dependence. Rachel discovered this when she stopped following other people's plans and started listening to her own decades of experience. She noticed that she always felt better, clearer, more stable, less obsessed with food when she had protein within a couple hours of waking. Not because some diet said so, because her body had been telling her so for years, and she'd finally listened. That became her first sacred boundary, not a rule to be perfect at, a boundary that protected her well-being. The difference, when she honored it, she felt more herself. When she couldn't, she was curious instead of ashamed. What do you know? Not what you think you should know, what you actually know from lived experience. Maybe it's certain foods make everything harder and removing them makes everything easier. Structure helps you, not as punishment, but as support. You need to move your body or your mind gets stuck. Cooking your own food grounds you in a way eating out never does. You do better with gentle rhythm than rigid rules. Connection matters more than you want to admit. Your boundaries are already there, buried in your tangled drawer. You just have to trust them enough to claim them. Build trust one choice at a time. Here's the thing about self-trust. It's not something you find. It's something you build. Brick by brick, choice by choice, moment by moment. Every time you honor what you know instead of what you think you should do, trust increases. Every time you choose what actually supports you over what sounds impressive to others, trust increases. Every time you show up for yourself when things get hard, instead of abandoning yourself to shame, trust increases. I call it her confidence muscle. Every time Rachel lived in integrity with what she knew was her best choice, every time she applauded her better decision and acted on it, she strengthened that muscle. It started small, barely a flicker, but over time, choice after choice, it became the thing that defined her. Not perfection, not flawless compliance, just consistently choosing to trust herself. You have that muscle too. Maybe it's atrophied from years of doubting yourself, years of following external rules instead of internal wisdom, but it's there, and you can build it. Starting today, starting with one choice, one moment of, I know what I need here, and I'm going to trust that knowing. What your plan actually needs, not my plan, not some expert's plan, yours. It needs 3 things, and they're simpler than you might think. Foundation practices that fill your battery before life drains it. Not complicated routines that take hours. Simple things that your decades of experience have shown you actually matter. Sleep, connection, movement, whatever tells your nervous system we're fundamentally okay. Sacred boundaries that protect your well-being. Not rules that police your behavior. Boundaries that come from your wisdom about what your body actually needs. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5, not 20. You already know what they are. You've just been dismissing them as too simple. A plan for the messy middle. Not if things get hard, when they get hard. What helps then? Who can you call? What do you need to hear from yourself? What brings you back to center? That's it. That's the whole architecture. The details, those are yours to fill in, based on your decades of data collection, based on what you know works when you're brave enough to trust it. Your processing style, the filter everything runs through. Remember your processing style from earlier chapters? That's not just interesting information. It's the lens through which everything else makes sense. If you're highly sensitive, your plan needs to be simple. One thing at a time. More space, less stimulation. Your system isn't wrong. It just needs different conditions than someone else's might. If you're a sensation seeker, your plan needs structure and variety, support and novelty, not because you're broken, but because your nervous system runs on different fuel. If you're a high sympathetic responder, your plan needs flexibility above all else. Room to breathe, permission to adapt. The tighter you grip, the more your system rebels. Your decades of patterns make sense through this lens. What looked like failure might have been your highly sensitive system drowning in overwhelm. What looked like rebellion might have been your system fighting rigid control. What looked like inconsistency might have been intelligent adaptation to different conditions. Filter everything through this understanding. It changes the whole story. What becomes possible? When you trust your accumulated wisdom enough to create your plan, simple, personal, grounded in your actual experience, here's what starts to shift. Food becomes less loaded. You can go hours without thinking about it. Restaurants don't require extensive battle plans. Unexpected food situations don't trigger panic. Your body starts to feel more like home. You can hear what you actually need. You can trust those signals instead of second-guessing everything. Difficult emotions don't immediately send you to food. You have other options, other ways to regulate, other sources of comfort. The people in your life see you more fully, not because you're suddenly perfect, but because you're suddenly real. The harsh voice in your head softens, not overnight, but gradually. Instead of what's wrong with you, it becomes, what do you need right now? Joy, the kind you don't have to earn first, becomes possible. This isn't fantasy. This is what happens when you stop fighting yourself and start partnering with yourself. When you honor your complexity instead of trying to force yourself simple. When you trust your decades of wisdom instead of dismissing them as decades of failure. Your continuing journey. This isn't the end of your work with food. Life will keep happening. Your plan will need adjusting. You'll still struggle sometimes. But now you have something you didn't have before. Permission to trust yourself. Evidence that you know more than you think you do. Understanding that your decades of experience matter. Awareness that your patterns contain wisdom, not just pathology. You're not someone who needs another diet plan. You're not someone who needs to be fixed. You're someone who's been conducting a decades-long experiment in being human, in a body with food as both nourishment and comfort and sometimes battleground. You already have the data, now you get to trust it. Create your boundaries, build your practices, honor your complexity, trust your timeline. You know what works. You've always known. The question was never, what should I do? The question was always, will I trust what I know? What comes next? Maybe you reread chapters that resonated deeply. Maybe you work with someone who understands this complexity. Maybe you sit quietly with a journal and finally write down what you actually know about yourself. Maybe you find your people, the ones who can offer real accompaniment instead of accountability. Maybe you just sit with what you've learned. Let it settle. Let it shift how you see yourself. All of it's valid. Only you know what your system needs right now. Your decades of experience aren't evidence of failure. They're evidence of your persistence, your intelligence, your nervous system's remarkable capacity to survive and adapt, and keep trying. You've been writing your plan all along, one experience at a time. Now you just have to trust it enough to live it. For additional support, for all possible services, support options, and continued learning, visit transformwithsonia.com. Sign up for email updates at transformwithsonia.com. There's an app, Transform My Pet, for daily practices, community, and more. Connect on social media. Follow me, Sonja Irina Johansson, on Facebook. Follow Transform with Sonja on Facebook and Instagram. Welcome to trusting yourself. You have everything you need. You always have. With deep respect for your wisdom, your complexity, and your courage. Sonja Irina Johansson.